Quick demonstration of why the feeds on the fountain pens today are not as good as they used to be. And part of the reason why they are like that is because they are made out of cheap plastic that is quite hydrophobic, and therefore the ink doesn't wet it very well. Because the ink doesn't wet it very well, the capillary action doesn't work that well, so the ink is not withdrawn in proper amounts from the reservoir, and therefore the ink flow is much more reduced. Here I have a feed from a Jinhao X450, and Jinhao X450, I fitted it with a Zebra G super flex nib, and therefore it suffers from severe ink starvation. And what I wanted to show you now is that when I dip the nib here, the feed here, into the glass of water, you will see how easily the water runs off of it, and it doesn't really hang onto it. I'm not sure how well you can see this, that water splits away from the surface, and that means water doesn't have a very good adhesion on the feed and runs off the surface. In other words, it pearls up on the surface. Of course, the fountain pen ink has a lower surface tension than that of water, and the wettability should be a little bit better, but still not great. So these plastic feeds, I'm going to attempt to chemically modify their surface so that the water or ink has a much better adhesion to their surface. That means the water won't pearl up on the surface that easily, and hopefully that will improve the ink flow to the nib, especially for nibs that need huge amounts of ink, as that of super flexible Zebra G nib. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that when you dip this feed into the water, it shouldn't be dry, it should be wet. If water clings on it, if there is good adhesion or good wettability between water and the feed. You see now pretty much is dry. The feed is dry, the water pulls up on its surface and runs off pretty quickly. So this is what I'm gonna attempt to do, is to try to chemically modify the surface so that when you dip the feed, it comes out wet. Let's see how well that works. Hi, so we are now in the chemistry lab, and I'm going to demonstrate how to chemically modify the surface of the feed, and hopefully will improve the adhesion performance of water. I'm going to show you now, as you can see here, that the water pulls up on the surface of the Jinhao feed, Jinhao X450. And the idea is to chemically modify the surface so that the water doesn't curl up like this anymore, but completely fully spreads on the surface of the feed. So let's see if I'm successful. So in order to do this, I'm going to put these two feeds, dry this a little bit, I'm going to put these two feeds into this machine, which is an UV ozone machine. And the idea of this is that the surface will be oxidized, and then it will be hopefully more hydrophilic. So I'm going to put this to half an hour let's try first 5 minutes and see if there is any improvement. So we are going to essentially do the water test. When this spread is going to be fine, that means the surface is ready, and we'll see how it behaves. So I took a feed from one Jinhao X450 and one feed from one Jinhao 159. The Jinhao X450 feed, I'm going to try it with a Superflex Zebra G, and the Jinhao 159 I'm going to try it with the factory nib number 6 and see if the ink flow has improved. So I will see you in 5 minutes. Now it is time to see if our surface treatment did anything to improve the performance of the feed of the Jinhao X450 and 159. Let's try first the Jinhao X450 with the Zebra G super flexible. So in order to do that, we'll come back to this Jinhao and Zebra G and try to install it to put it back into the pen. So I was mentioning earlier that you have to match the curvature of the nib with that of the feed, so you get a proper contact between the two. I have the impression that it is not that good at the moment. Try to improve it a little bit. So the way you do it is you take essentially the feed, which is now stuck here, and what you do with the feed is you try to lower the curvature by compressing it laterally from this side as you can see here, just a tiny bit, and yeah, that improved it a little bit. Now I will place it on top. As you can see, the first cut in the nib has to align the first cut in the feed. I discussed about that in my previous video. And then you know it's properly aligned. And then you also have to find the proper entrance point into the pen. But first I'm going to check that only with the feed. Oh, yeah, this is the one. So if you don't do it properly, it might be that you're stuck with a nib in there and then you cannot get it out. So the best way is to try to find the proper entrance point and then you press as hard as you can. And also making sure you have it properly aligned. Now it's not properly aligned, so I have to pull it back out. And the danger is that pulling it out, you might destroy this zebra G nib, and it's not a very nice thing to do. As you can see, it requires some fiddling, so I will try to prime it now because I still have some ink in the feed, in the reservoir. So now I brought ink to the feed and let's see how this behaves now. Next I'm going to do a writing sample. Let's see how this writes now. So it seems that the ink didn't have time to get to the nib. So now there you go. So super flex. Okay, so too much ink. Should be better. Super flex. So next I'm going to do the following. I'm going to fill up this pen as one would normally fill it up. And once the cartridge is full, the converter is full with ink, then we'll do a writing sample. Fortunately I have to keep it inclined because I don't have too much ink left in this bottle. As you can see, the converter is now half full only. So, but that should be enough for this demonstration. And we also want to see how the feed now keeps up with the super flexible Zebra G nib. So I'll put this aside. Let's try to wipe up the nib. And let's see if the performance has improved. What do I compare it with? I compare it with the performance in the last video I posted. This is exactly the same feed and exactly the same nib. Occasionally we have seen some railroading and also ink starvation when the pen wouldn't write that much. So therefore I'm gonna start writing now and see if this feed keeps up for half a page without priming. So let's see. Unfortunately, the ink seems to be leaking much more than before, but this might be a problem also with this Jinhao, because this converter might not be airtight. So let's see what we can do. I'm gonna soak up some ink, pull the converter to the max, and all right. I would say this is pretty decent. Not too many complaints here. But let's force this nib to its max. Now without any pressure. Now with a little bit of pressure. And this line is, I would say, a fine. This is a medium. And if we try to push it even more, this is a broad, a European broad. This is a double broad or triple broad, I would say. And now it goes without limit. And it seems that the pen railroads, but my impression is that it keeps quite well, depending how hard you try to push it. And this is really to the max, really to the max. And if you give it enough time and write slowly, you can see that the feed can keep up sufficiently well. So I would say, if I have to redo this, I would say fine, medium, broad, double broad, and then triple broad, much broader, and then it starts railroading. But from here to here I get a huge line variation. I can fit probably about 5 or 6 fine lines into the broadest one. And if I push it even further and go slowly, also the pen inclination matters a lot. So if you keep it like this, you see it keeps up sufficiently well. I would say this is quite an improvement from before. Now let's see if we can write with it without having to prime it, and how long we can do that before we run into ink starvation. Now I wrote a little bit faster, and it seems, although a little bit scratchy or feedbacky, it can also be used as a everyday writer. I have no problem writing with this my journals. So writing faster with it, it seems that the feed keeps up very decently. No skips, absolutely no skip, which is fantastic for this such a fine nib as Zebra G. And let me write slower now and try to get more line variation within the text. Let's see. So railroad. I would say it keeps up much better than in my previous video, and I'm really trying to push it much harder now. So while it railroads, it begins to railroad without priming. Normal writing is still fine, but I really want to push it and see how long I can really write without running into ink starvation and having it to prime again. Because this flexible fountain pen is such an ink guzzler, should finish up the ink I have in the converter pretty quickly. So it's quite impressive that I'm already almost a page through, as you can see, and I didn't prime it at all. The feed keeps up quite well. It only railroads sometimes, but the rest of the time the line variation and the performance, it is quite satisfactory. So what I have done with this feed, I have exposed it to ozone, that is O3, the chemical formula, and this will essentially oxidize the surface of a nib by creating the oxygen radicals, and the oxidation is such that any kind of plastic initially only carbon-hydrogen bonds. The oxygen will insert in between these carbon-hydrogen bonds, created hydroxyl bonds or even carbonyl, and these are quite polar and hydrophilic. That means the water on a hydrophilic surface will completely spread and wet, that being a droplet of water, as you've seen in the film, and on the polar hydrophobic surface it will essentially curl up like this. Now, as I said, I still get occasional railroading, but no ink starvation really. I'm quite impressed. No ink starvation. So yesterday or in my last video, I really had to prime the nib several times. Now I don't have to do that. You can see that I can press it. I still get some ink, some railroading, but no ink starvation. The ink saturation still remains, and the feed keeps up very well. I would say impressively. So you saw me now, I finished one page of text, not having to prime the feed. Let's see how much ink I still have into the converter. So still halfway through. Excellent. So I guess I will do another page and see how it really keeps up. So far, impressed, very impressed. So the ink saturation is still excellent for normal writing. This is still, I would say, a broad because I'm pushing on it, but if I don't press at all, no pushing, I would say I will get this kind of line. Very nice. And now let's push it again. So let's see, ink. So. This is really pushed to its max. So I'm not trying here to write calligraphically and trying to push the pen, but you see some unbelievably line variation from a fine to ultra broad, triple or quadruple broad, I would say. And Impressively, the fountain pen still keeps up quite well. So UV ozone treatment. So it's really unbelievable how much these companies can do for their customers, but unfortunately all are running for profit, trying to cut the costs down, and are not really employing scientists or trying to go to the university and really improve their fountain pen performance with simple means. This is very economically and efficient way to do it. I recommend for those who have this kind of capabilities that they really should try to do it themselves, or go to a lab that they can do such surface treatment. And really such an easy method can make a huge difference between the performance of the feed before and after. And it's such a pity that these companies don't employ scientists anymore that can really work on this kind of problems and solve them. And I could write longer with this fountain pen, but it seems that it really keeps up very well, and the performance is really more than pleasing. I'm very happy.